You sat beside a dying woman, fed her soup, held her hand, and walked out with her house. Don't you dare call that love. 2 days after Grandma's funeral, my sister texted from the Maldives. We can't access her account. What did you do? I said nothing. Grandma's $248,000 was already protected, and their panic became my first proof. My sister Meredith set it across a polished conference table in Traverse City, with 2 lawyers, our parents, and my husband close enough to hear every syllable. She did not shout. That made it worse. Her voice was clean, sharp, and steady, the kind of voice people trust because it never sounds messy enough to be cruel. Preston, her husband, sat beside her with one hand folded over the other, as if this were a business meeting and not the public burial of my character. I remember looking at my mother first. Linda Whitman stared down at her lap. My father, Robert, pressed his lips together and looked toward the window, the way he always did when a hard truth entered the room, and asked him to choose a side. And me? I sat there with my grandmother's house key in my purse, her handwritten recipe cards in a blue metal box at home, and the horrible understanding that grief had not made my family softer. It had made them honest. 3 weeks earlier, on a Wednesday morning in early October, Grandma Ruth Caldwell died in a small hospice room in northern Michigan. Outside her window, the maple trees had just begun turning red along the edges, like someone had touched each leaf with a match. The room smelled of antiseptic, clean sheets, and the faint lavender lotion one of the nurses rubbed into her hands at night. I was sitting beside her bed, holding those hands. They had grown thin by then, almost weightless, but I still remembered what they used to be. Strong enough to knead dough, steady enough to braid my hair, warm enough to press against my forehead when I lied and said I was not sick. My name is Nora Whitman. I was 32 years old then, a home health physical therapist. My work took me into the quiet rooms of elderly people who wanted, more than anything, to keep one piece of independence. I helped stroke patients learn to stand again. I taught widowers how to step into the shower without falling. I measured hallways, checked loose rugs, adjusted walkers, counted painful steps after hip surgery, and celebrated when someone could reach a kitchen cabinet without calling a son or daughter for help. Over the years, I learned that aging rarely announces its grief. It hides in a jar lid someone can no longer open, in a porch step that suddenly feels too high, in an apology whispered by a woman who needs help getting out of a chair she bought with her first paycheck. Grandma Ruth taught me how to see those things before my job ever did. She never loved loudly. She did not make speeches about sacrifice. She made chicken soup when I was feverish. She baked banana bread when school had made me feel small. She turned on the little lamp in her front window every evening at 5:15 because, as she used to say, a house should look like somebody is waiting, even if nobody's coming up the road. The week before she died, when she was still awake for longer stretches, she lifted one trembling hand and touched my hair. "Turn around, Nora," she whispered. I did. Slowly, carefully, she braided it the way she had when I was 6. Her fingers forgot many things near the end, but they did not forget that rhythm. I sat perfectly still because if I cried, she would spend her last strength comforting me. So I swallowed the tears. I let her braid my hair. And when she finished, she patted my shoulder once, as if she had said everything that needed saying. That morning in hospice, no one was fighting yet. No one was talking about trusts, bank accounts, property taxes, or fairness. Meredith was not in the room. Preston was not leaning over paperwork with that calm, expensive voice of his. There was only the soft hiss of oxygen, the pale autumn light, and my grandmother's hand resting inside mine. When her breathing changed, I knew before the nurse came in. I leaned close and whispered, "I'm here, Grandma." And her fingers moved once. Not a squeeze, not quite, just enough to let me pretend she had heard me. By noon, the woman who had made every lonely place in my childhood feel like home was gone. I thought losing her would be the hardest part. I was wrong. Grandma Ruth's house sat at the end of a narrow road that curved through pine trees before opening toward the lake. It was not grand in the way people in glossy magazines use that word. The floors creaked in cold weather. The kitchen cabinets had been painted twice, maybe 3 times, and one drawer near the stove always stuck unless you lifted it before pulling. The back porch leaned slightly toward the water, as if the whole house had spent years listening to the waves and wanted to move closer. But to me, it was the safest place in the world. There was a wooden swing on the porch that complained every time the wind touched it. There were lilac bushes along the side yard, purple and fragrant in early summer. There was a gravel path leading down to the dock, where my grandfather used to fish before he passed, and where Grandma Ruth still carried her coffee on quiet mornings, wrapped in the same blue cardigan no matter how many new sweaters we bought her. After Grandpa died, my mother suggested more than once that Grandma Ruth move into an assisted living community. "You'd have people around," Mom told her. "Meals, activities, someone checking on you." Grandma Ruth had smiled into her tea. "Linda," she said, "I am not ready to spend my mornings being asked if I want to play bingo." That was Ruth Caldwell, gentle but not movable. She stayed in her house because the house still held her life. Every room had a purpose. The pantry smelled faintly of cinnamon. The front hallway held a chipped umbrella stand. The guest room had a quilt she made from my mother's old dresses. In the kitchen window, she kept a tiny ceramic bird I painted at a summer fair when I was 7. It was ugly, lopsided, and bright yellow. She never threw it away. At 5:15 every evening, she turned on the lamp in the front window. Not 5, not 5:30, 5:15. When I was little, I asked why. She tapped the shade with one finger and said, "Because twilight can make even a full house look lonely. A light tells the world someone still cares what comes through the door." I did not understand it then. I do now. Whenever something hurt me as a child, I went to Grandma Ruth's kitchen. If a girl at school laughed at my clothes, Grandma did not demand names. If Meredith made me feel foolish for crying too easily, Grandma did not tell me to toughen up. If Mom said, "Let it go, Nora," Grandma did not repeat it. She simply tied on her faded apron and made something warm. Banana bread with too much butter. Chicken soup with ginger when I had a cold. Peach cobbler in a square glass dish with brown sugar bubbling along the edges. By the time the smell filled the room, whatever had broken inside me usually felt less sharp. Grandma never dragged pain into the light before it was ready. She just made the room safe enough for it to come out on its own. That was the kind of love Meredith never understood. To my sister, love looked like management, a perfect Thanksgiving table, birthday cards mailed on time, family photos arranged so everyone knew where to stand. She remembered anniversaries, corrected grammar and sympathy notes, and made sure no one brought store-bought pie to Christmas dinner. People praised her for it. "Meredith keeps this family together," Mom often said. Maybe that was true, in one way. But sometimes the person everyone calls the glue is really just the one holding everyone still. I did not know then that Preston had already begun asking quiet questions about the house. How much lakefront property had gone up, whether the roof needed replacing, whether Grandma Ruth had updated her estate documents. Those questions had not reached me yet. Back then, the house was still only a house. The lamp still came on at 5:15, and I still believed every person who stepped through that door understood the difference between a home and an asset. Meredith Whitman Hayes was 4 years older than me, and she had been treated like an adult long before she became one. In family pictures, you could see it happening. Meredith at 8, standing straight beside me with one hand on my shoulder, already looking less like a child than a tiny supervisor. Meredith at 12, helping mom set out Thanksgiving plates while I sat on the floor coloring. Meredith at 16, calling relatives before Christmas because mom was overwhelmed and dad had disappeared into the garage with a broken lawnmower that suddenly needed urgent attention. Everyone called her responsible. Everyone called her impressive. No one asked what it did to a girl to be praised every time she forgot how to be young. By the time Meredith reached adulthood, she no longer saw responsibility as something she carried. She saw it as something she owned. If there was a family dinner, she chose the menu. If there was a group photo, she arranged the bodies. If there was a disagreement, she summarized it in a way that made her sound reasonable and everyone else sound emotional, especially me. I was the quieter daughter, the one who stepped back when the room got crowded, the one who apologized quickly because silence felt safer than conflict. I cried too easily, according to Meredith. I was sensitive, according to mom. I was hard to read, according to dad, though he rarely tried. Mom had one sentence that followed me from childhood into adulthood. "Let your sister have this one, Nora." I heard it when Meredith took the larger bedroom because she needed space to study. I heard it when she ruined my 13th birthday by announcing she had failed her driver's test, then spent the whole evening crying in the bathroom while everyone comforted her. I heard it when she called my college major sweet but not practical, and I snapped back for once. "Let your sister have this one, Nora. She's under a lot of pressure." The pressure was Meredith's shield. If she was rude, she was tired. If she was controlling, she was helping. If she hurt me, I was expected to understand the burden behind the blade. Dad's favorite line was quieter, but just as damaging. "I don't want to get in the middle of you girls." He said it with a sigh, like neutrality was kindness. But in our house, the middle was where truth went to die. When he refused to choose, mom's version won. When mom's version won, Meredith was protected. When Meredith was protected, I learned to swallow my anger before anyone had to taste it. Grandma Ruth saw more than she said. She never openly criticized mom or dad. That was not her way. But sometimes, after a family dinner, she would send me home with leftovers packed in the good containers, not the stained plastic ones. She would tuck a note under the foil. "For later, sweetheart." Just 3 words, but they meant, "I saw you." When Meredith married Preston Hayes, the family treated it like confirmation that she had built the life she deserved. He was polished, successful, and calm in a way that made people lean forward when he spoke. He knew how to shake hands with older men, compliment older women, and say nothing too directly. Mom adored him. Dad respected him. Meredith looked at him the way people look at proof. Their wedding was held at a vineyard outside Sutton's Bay. Meredith planned every inch of it. White roses, navy napkins, handwritten place cards, lake trout, roasted vegetables, and a string quartet playing softly enough to signal taste without begging for attention. At the reception, Grandma Ruth squeezed my hand under the table. "Pretty wedding," she said. "It is," I answered. Then she looked across the room at Meredith correcting the service placement of the cake knife and added, "Your sister likes things where she can see them." I laughed because I thought she was teasing. Now I think she was warning me. Meredith did not hate me then. Not exactly. She simply believed the family made sense when she stood at the center of it. Mom reinforced it. Dad permitted it. Preston admired it when it benefited him. And I had spent so many years being told to let her have this one, that I did not notice she had started reaching for everything. Preston Hayes never said anything ugly, if a beautiful word could do the same job. He did not say money. He said liquidity. He did not say sell the house. He said explore reasonable options. He did not say he wanted control. He said the family needed transparency. That was Preston's gift. He could wrap a blade in linen and convince people it was a napkin. The first time I noticed him looking at Grandma Ruth's house like a number instead of a place, we were all gathered there on a Sunday afternoon in late September. Grandma had been weaker that week, and Mom had insisted we bring lunch. Meredith arrived with a roasted chicken from a specialty market, a salad in a glass bowl, and the expression of someone prepared to be praised for doing what other people did quietly. Preston came in behind her, wearing a camel-colored coat and carrying a bottle of wine nobody opened. Grandma Ruth was in her recliner near the front window, wrapped in a quilt. She smiled when I bent to kiss her cheek. "Did you eat?" I asked. "A little." "That means no." She gave me a look. "That means I am 81 and allowed to negotiate." I went to the kitchen and warmed soup while Meredith adjusted the pillows behind Grandma's back. It should have been a peaceful afternoon. The lake was silver under a cloudy sky. The house smelled like thyme, bread, and old wood. Then Preston stepped onto the porch with Dad and began talking about lakefront values. At first, I thought it was casual. People in Michigan talk about property the way they talk about weather. Taxes go up, roofs need work, shorelines shift. Somebody's cousin sells a cabin for more than anyone expected, and suddenly everyone has an opinion. But Preston's questions were too precise. "Do you know what the annual property tax is now?" "Robert?" Dad shrugged. "Ruth handles her own bills." "Of course," Preston said smoothly. "I just wonder whether she has considered how much maintenance this place will need over the next few years." I stopped in the kitchen doorway. Meredith looked at me and smiled too quickly. "Preston's only being practical." Practical. Another word people use when they want an emotion to sit down and be quiet. Later, I learned Preston's latest flip house outside Grand Rapids had gone wrong. A contractor walked off. Mold was found behind 2 walls. Interest kept stacking. The buyer backed out. Preston told Meredith it was a temporary cash flow issue. But temporary problems do not make a man stare at an old woman's porch railing like it is already listed for sale. That afternoon, he walked through the house slowly, not snooping exactly, but noticing too much. The cracked tile near the mudroom, the water stain above the upstairs landing, the original windows. "Beautiful place," he said, touching the frame of the back door. "But homes like this can become a burden fast." Grandma Ruth heard him from the recliner. "A burden to whom?" she asked. The room went still. Preston turned with a soft laugh. "I only mean for the family, Mrs. Caldwell. Big properties require planning." Grandma looked at him for a long moment. Her face was tired, but her eyes were not. "Then it's good this one still belongs to me." Meredith's mouth tightened. Mom pretended to check the salad dressing. Dad suddenly became very interested in the lake. I carried Grandma's soup to her and set it on the little table beside the chair. Her hand brushed mine, light but deliberate. She knew. Maybe not everything. Maybe not the numbers, not the debt, not the way Preston had already begun counting money that had never belonged to him. But she knew the difference between concern and appetite. Before leaving, Preston paused near the hallway that led to Grandma's small office. "Has Ruth updated her estate documents recently?" he asked Meredith, low enough that he thought I would not hear. Meredith whispered, "Not now." Not no. Not why would you ask that? Just not now. That was the moment something cold settled in my stomach. Because grief had not even arrived yet, and they were already making room for it at the negotiating table. By the time Grandma Ruth moved into hospice, Meredith had begun speaking in a voice I privately called her family chairwoman voice. It was calm, clipped, and covered in concern. She used it when asking nurses for updates, correcting Mom's memory of appointment times, and telling me where to place flowers, as if grief needed a seating chart. The hospice was small, only one story, with wide hallways and framed watercolor prints of barns, lakes, and quiet roads. It was the kind of place designed to soften endings. Volunteers left cookies near the front desk. Someone played old hymns on a piano in the common room on Thursday afternoons. The nurses spoke gently, but never falsely. Grandma had a room at the end of the East Hall. There was a maple tree outside her window, and in the mornings, the light came through the leaves in red and gold pieces. I brought her lotion, soft socks, and the blue cardigan she kept asking for even when she was too warm to wear it. Meredith brought a notebook. On the third day, she arrived in dark jeans, a cream sweater, and boots that did not make a sound on the floor. Preston followed with coffee from town, though Grandma could barely swallow water by then. Nurse Emily Foster came in to check Grandma's medication schedule. She was young, maybe late 20s, with steady hands and the careful kindness of someone who had already seen too many families try to turn dying into a management problem. Meredith stood at once. "Emily, I need to understand where we are cognitively," she said. "Is my grandmother still considered capable of making decisions?" Emily glanced toward Grandma, who was sleeping, then back at Meredith. "I can discuss general comfort updates," Emily said, "but I can't release medical details without proper authorization." Meredith blinked, as if the words had been spoken in another language. "I'm her granddaughter." "I understand. I'm family." Emily's face did not change. "I understand that too. But Mrs. Caldwell's HIPAA authorization lists Nora Whitman as the primary contact. Nora is also listed as a healthcare proxy if decision-making becomes necessary." The room became painfully quiet. Mom, sitting near the window, looked from Meredith to me. Dad shifted in his chair and rubbed his forehead. Preston lowered his coffee cup very slowly. Meredith turned toward me. For 1 second, her face was not angry. It was stunned, like someone had moved a wall in the house where she had lived all her life. "You knew about this?" she asked. "No," I said, and I meant it. Grandma had told me she wanted me to be the one doctors called if things became hard, but I had not known how formally she had written it down. Meredith laughed once, without humor. "So Nora gets to decide what the rest of us are allowed to know?" Emily stepped in before I could answer. "No one is withholding information to punish anyone," she said. "This is simply how medical privacy works." Meredith's eyes sharpened. "With respect, my grandmother is dying. This is not the time for bureaucracy." Emily's voice stayed level. "It is exactly the time when her documented wishes matter most." I looked at Grandma then. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was shallow. She seemed far away from all of us, but her name, her choices, her privacy still held the room with more authority than anyone standing in it. Preston placed a hand lightly on Meredith's back. "Let's not make this harder," he murmured. But his eyes were on me, not with sympathy, with calculation. Meredith gathered her notebook, though she did not leave. She sat down beside Mom, crossed one leg over the other, and stared at the floor as if she had been publicly humiliated. I wanted to tell her I had not asked for this. I wanted to say Grandma loved her too. I wanted to smooth the air because that was what I had been trained to do in my family. Instead, I said nothing. For once, a locked door had not been locked by me. It had been locked by Grandma Ruth herself, and Meredith had just heard it click. 2 evenings before Grandma Ruth died, the hospice doctor said she might not have much time left. Nobody used the word days, but everyone heard it. Mom cried in the hallway with one hand over her mouth. Dad stood beside the vending machine, staring at a row of crackers, as if choosing one could save him from choosing a feeling. Meredith began making calls. Florist, pastor, cousin Janet in Ohio. The kind of calls people praised her for making because they did not notice how quickly organization could become control. I stayed in Grandma's room. Her breathing had grown softer, with long pauses that made my chest tighten. I rubbed lotion into her hands because the nurses said touch could still comfort a person when words could not reach them anymore. That afternoon, Meredith suggested we all step outside for air. I did not want to go, but Grandma was sleeping, and Nurse Emily promised to call if anything changed. So I followed them to the small porch behind the hospice, where a few metal chairs faced a garden of fading mums. Preston handed me a paper cup of coffee. I took it, though I did not drink. For a while, no one spoke. Cars passed beyond the trees. Somewhere inside, a phone rang twice and stopped. Then Preston said, "Nora, has Ruth ever talked to you about how her accounts are structured?" I looked at him. Meredith's eyes closed briefly, as if she wished he had waited 10 more seconds before becoming himself. "What accounts?" I asked. "Her savings, any trust arrangements, payable on death designations." His tone was mild, almost apologetic. "I'm only thinking ahead. Families can get hurt when things aren't clear." I stared at the coffee darkening the seam of the paper cup. "Grandma is still alive." "Of course," he said, "and I respect that." But he did not sound like a man standing near death. He sounded like a man preparing for closing documents. Meredith leaned forward. "Nora, nobody is trying to be insensitive. We just need to make sure there won't be confusion later." "Confusion for who?" I asked. Her face tightened. "For the family." There it was, the family. In our house, those two words had always meant whoever was most uncomfortable with my refusal. I stood. "I should go back in." Preston's voice followed me, still smooth. "No one benefits from pretending practical matters don't exist." I turned around. No one benefits from treating a dying woman like a pending transaction either. For the first time, his expression slipped, only a little. Meredith whispered, "That was unfair." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because unfair had lived in our family for decades and apparently only became visible when I named it. Inside, Grandma was still sleeping. The light across her blanket had turned amber. I sat beside her until visiting hours thinned and the hallway went quiet. On the drive home, I pulled into a gas station parking lot because my hands were shaking too badly to keep going. I searched my phone for the name a coworker had given me months earlier. Samuel Barlow, a state attorney, Traverse City. When his voicemail answered, my voice sounded smaller than I wanted. "My name is Nora Whitman. My grandmother is Ruth Caldwell. I'm not trying to challenge anything. I'm not trying to get anything. I just need to know how to make sure no one pressures her while she's vulnerable." I left my number. Then I sat in the car under the gas station lights, watching people buy snacks, pump fuel, continue ordinary lives. The next morning, before Mr. Barlow called me back, hospice called first. Grandma Ruth had passed just after sunrise. Mom said she went peacefully. I believed that. But peace, I learned, does not always stay with the living. I met Samuel Barlow 4 days after Grandma Ruth died. His office was above a small bookstore in Traverse City, with old brick walls, tall windows, and a conference table that looked too large for one grieving granddaughter. Outside, Tourists moved along the sidewalk with paper coffee cups and shopping bags, wrapped in scarves against the lake wind. Inside, everything smelled like leather, paper, and rain. Mr. Barlow was in his late 50s, with silver hair and the careful manner of a man who had spent years delivering news people were not ready to hear. He did not rush me. He offered coffee. I said no. He offered water. I held the glass with both hands and did not drink. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Whitman," he said. "Thank you." He opened a folder in front of him. "Your grandmother completed her estate planning several months ago. She created a revocable living trust and transferred the lake house into it. She also updated several account designations." I nodded as if I understood, though my ears had begun to ring. "She named you successor trustee," he continued, "and primary beneficiary of the lake house." My grip tightened around the glass. "What?" He paused. "The house will not go through probate in the usual way. The trust controls its distribution." There must be some mistake." "There isn't." He turned one page, then another. "There's also a savings account of approximately $248,000. It was arranged through a legal transfer on death structure connected to her estate plan. You are the designated recipient." The room seemed to tilt. I thought of Meredith on the hospice porch, Preston asking about liquidity, Mom telling me, even before there was a fight, to try not to make anything harder. "I didn't ask her for any of this," I said. "I know." "You don't know that." Mr. Barlow looked at me steadily. "Actually, I do." He placed another document on the table. "Your grandmother requested a cognitive capacity evaluation before signing. Her physician found her oriented and capable. 2 witnesses were present. I also made a note that you were not in the room during the signing and that Mrs. Caldwell specifically asked that no family member be present." My throat tightened. "She knew people would question it?" "Yes." He folded his hands. "She said Meredith would call it unfair. Hearing my sister's name made the air colder." "She said that?" "She did." I looked down at the papers. Ruth Caldwell. Her signature was smaller than I remembered, but steady. "Why would she do this?" I whispered. Mr. Barlow was silent for a moment, as if deciding how much of a dead woman's private tenderness he was allowed to give away. Then he said, "Mrs. Caldwell told me Meredith will turn that house into a transaction. Nora will keep it as a home." I closed my eyes. For one foolish second, I wished he had said something easier, something about gratitude, about caregiving, about fairness. But Grandma had not built her decision on sentiment. She had built it on sight. She had seen Meredith's need to control. She had seen Preston's appetite. And somehow, she had seen me too. Not the version of me my family preferred. Quiet, agreeable, easy to overrule. The real me. The one who noticed loose rugs before someone fell. The one who remembered medication times. The one who knew a lamp in a window could be a promise. "I don't want to fight my sister," I said. Mr. Barlow's expression softened. "Then I hope she doesn't force you to." He slid a copy of the trust summary toward me. "Keep these documents safe. Do not discuss account details over text. Do not sign anything without counsel. And if anyone pressures you, document it." Anyone. Such a small word, such a large warning. When I left his office, the rain had stopped. The street shone silver under the clouds. I sat in my car with a folder on the passenger seat, unable to start the engine. Grandma Ruth had left me a house, money, and responsibility. But underneath all of it, she had left me something I had wanted from my family my whole life. Proof that I had not imagined what I saw. Grandma Ruth's memorial service was held in a white church with a steeple you could see from Main Street. There was a guest book near the entrance, a framed photo of her beside white hydrangeas, and a pastor who spoke about faith, endurance, and the quiet dignity of a life spent loving people without asking for applause. Meredith cried at exactly the right moments. I do not mean that as cruelly as it sounds. My sister was grieving. I believe that. But even grief, in Meredith's hands, seemed arranged. She wore a black dress tailored close at the waist, pearl earrings, and waterproof mascara that held better than most promises in our family. She hugged relatives in the aisle. She thanked the pastor. She told Mrs. Donnelly, Grandma's neighbor, "Ruth meant so much to all of us." Preston stood beside her, one hand at the small of her back, nodding with solemn precision. If anyone had taken a photograph, they would have looked like the family members most capable of holding everything together. I stood near the back until Jonah found me. He did not ask if I was okay. He knew better. He just slipped his hand into mine. After the service, people gathered at the lake house. In northern Michigan, grief arrives with food. Neighbors brought tuna casserole, deviled eggs, potato salad, apple pie, dinner rolls, and coffee strong enough to keep sorrow awake. The kitchen filled with voices. Someone remembered Grandma's laugh. Someone else said she always sent thank you notes. A cousin from Ohio told me Ruth once mailed him wool socks because she heard his apartment had bad heat. I smiled until my face hurt. Meredith moved through the rooms like a hostess, opening foil pans, directing serving spoons, accepting condolences as if the house had already recognized her authority. Once, I saw her pause in the front hallway and look toward Grandma's small office. Preston noticed too. 2 days later, they left for the Maldives. "It was booked months ago," Meredith told Mom. "And honestly, after this week, Preston and I need a reset." Mom frowned, but only for a second. "Your sister processes things differently," she told me later. I had heard that sentence in 100 different outfits. The next afternoon, I drove to the lake house alone. The rooms were too still. The clock over the stove ticked loudly. The ceramic bird I had painted at 7 sat in the kitchen window, ugly and loyal. On the counter was Grandma's blue metal recipe box, dented at one corner because I had dropped it when I was 8. I opened it. The first card was peach cobbler. Her handwriting was small, slanted, and familiar enough to break me. On the back, she had written, "For days when the house needs to smell like home." I turned another card. Chicken soup. Add ginger for Nora. She eats more when nobody makes a fuss. Banana bread. Nora cuts slices too thick and pretends not to know. I laughed once, then covered my mouth because the sound came out wounded. Card after card held more than recipes. They held evidence of being known. Then I found one with my name written clearly. Nora never wants to be a burden. I hope one day she understands she never could be. I sat down because my knees stopped trusting me. Before we go deeper, if you are listening to Nora's story and feel she deserves better, please leave a like and share your advice in the comments. What should she do when family turns grief into accusation? Stay with her, because the recipe box is not the last truth Grandma Ruth left behind. Near the back was a card labeled Thanksgiving dressing. On the reverse, Grandma had written, "Meredith likes everything in its place. She learned to be strong too young, but sometimes she mistakes control for love." I read it 3 times. Grandma had not forgotten Meredith. She had seen her. That was what made the truth hurt more. My phone buzzed against the counter. A message from Meredith appeared. Sent from paradise. "We just checked in. When we get back, we need to sit down like adults and talk about Grandma's house and accounts. Don't let emotions make this messy." A photo followed. 2 champagne glasses, turquoise water, white balcony railing. I placed the phone face down beside the recipe box. For the first time since Grandma died, the house did not feel empty. It felt like it was holding its breath. I kept my phone face down for nearly an hour. The lake outside Grandma Ruth's kitchen window had gone dark blue, the kind of blue that comes just before evening gives up. I sat at the table with the recipe box open in front of me, reading the cards until the handwriting blurred. Peach cobbler, chicken soup, Thanksgiving dressing. Little instructions for food, yes, but also for memory, for pain, for me. Then my phone buzzed again. I almost ignored it. I thought it would be Meredith sending another carefully worded message from the Maldives. Maybe a reminder that adults communicate. As if she had not left a funeral reception and flown across the world to drink champagne over clear water. But this message was not from Meredith. It was a fraud alert from Lakeshore Community Bank. Unusual access attempt detected. I stared at the screen. A second notification followed, asking me to call the bank's fraud department. Then a voicemail appeared. Then another missed call. My body went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the October air. I called immediately. After confirming my identity, a woman named Carla explained that someone had attempted to access Grandma Ruth's savings account online using personal information that matched old records. The attempt had been blocked. The account was locked pending review. "Do you know where the attempt came from?" I asked. There was a pause. "We can't provide every technical detail over the phone, Ms. Whitman, but the login attempt appears to have originated outside the United States." My eyes moved to Meredith's message on the screen. The champagne, the balcony, the water too beautiful to belong in the same week as a burial. Could it have come from the Maldives? I asked. Another pause. That location would be consistent with the alert. I gripped the edge of the table. Carla continued, professional but kind. There was also an attempt to add or verify a recovery email. We flagged it because the account had already been marked for estate transition, and you are the only authorized contact listed in our documentation. Whose email? I can't confirm ownership at this stage, but I can tell you the recovery address included the name Hayes. Hayes. Preston. For a moment, I could not breathe. I pictured him in Grandma's hallway weeks earlier, glancing toward her small office. I remembered him asking whether her estate documents were updated. I remembered Meredith whispering, "Not now," instead of asking why he cared. This was not confusion. This was not family concern. This was someone trying the door after discovering Grandma had changed the locks. Carla advised me not to share account details, not to click any links, and to wait for written security documentation. I thanked her, though my voice sounded far away. The moment I hung up, Meredith called. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. She did not say hello. "Nora, something is wrong with Grandma's account." I looked at the recipe card still in my hand. Peach cobbler, for days when the house needs to smell like home. "No," I said. "Nothing is wrong. Preston was only trying to check a few things, and now the account is locked." "He had no right to check anything." Meredith inhaled sharply. "Don't start that. We are all family. Family is not a password to someone else's life." Silence. For the first time, Meredith had no immediate line prepared. Then her voice changed, lower and harder. "What did you do?" "Well, I didn't do anything," I said. "Grandma did." She laughed under her breath, but it was not amusement. It was the sound of a person finding a locked gate where she expected an open road. "You really think you can handle all this by yourself?" "No," I said. "But I know who Grandma trusted to try." Preston said something in the background. I could not make out the words, only the tone. Irritated, clipped, exposed. Meredith came back on the line. We'll talk when I get home. That depends on whether you want to talk, I said, or whether Preston wants access. She hung up. I sat in the dim kitchen, phone in one hand, recipe card in the other. Outside, the front window was dark. Grandma's lamp had not been turned on. I stood, crossed the room, and switched it on at 5:15. The small circle of light filled the glass. For years, I had thought that lamp meant someone was waiting. That evening, it felt like someone was watching. Meredith came home from the Maldives with a tan she tried to hide under grief. She called me the morning after they landed. I did not answer. By then, Mr. Barlow had already advised me to communicate in writing whenever possible, so I let her leave a voicemail. Nora, this can't continue. We need transparency. We need a family conversation before things get uglier than they have to. Things. That was the word she used for Grandma's house, Grandma's money, Grandma's final wishes. Things. By noon, an email went out to relatives. The subject line was gentle enough to fool people. About Grandma Ruth's estate. Meredith wrote that she and Preston were heartbroken to discover certain decisions may have been made during a medically fragile period. She said she wanted clarity, fairness, and respect for Grandma's true legacy. She never accused me directly. She did not have to. Every sentence pointed at me like a finger wearing gloves. Within hours, my phone started ringing. Aunt Diane from Ohio asked whether I had spent a lot of private time with Grandma near the end. Uncle Mark said no house was worth dividing a family. A cousin I had not seen in 3 years texted, I'm praying everyone does the right thing. Nobody asked what Grandma had actually written. Nobody asked whether Meredith had seen the documents. Nobody asked why Preston tried to reach an account from another country. They only heard the word fairness and bowed their heads like it was scripture. That evening, Mom called. I almost did not pick up, but old habits are hard to bury. Nora, she said, sounding tired before the conversation even began. Your sister is devastated. I'm devastated too, Mom. I know, sweetheart, but Meredith feels blindsided. Grandma's choices weren't an attack on Meredith. There was a pause. Then came the sentence I had known all my life. Could you just let your sister have this one? I closed my eyes. There it was again, the family lullaby. Soft, familiar, and poisonous. Have what, Mom? A lamp? A kitchen? A bank account Preston tried to access without permission? That's not fair. No, I said, my voice shaking. What isn't fair is asking me to surrender Grandma's wishes so Meredith won't have to feel rejected. Mom went quiet. I had never said anything like that to her before. She's your sister, Mom whispered, and I'm your daughter. The silence after that was so complete, I could hear the refrigerator humming. When we hung up, I thought the worst had passed. It had not. 2 days later, Meredith posted on Facebook. Grief reveals things you wish you never had to see. Sometimes family breaks your heart in ways strangers never could. Trying to choose grace while asking for truth. There was no name. There did not need to be. Comments bloomed beneath it. So sorry, Mare. Money changes people. Your grandma would want peace. Stay strong. Toxic family is real. I stared at the screen until the words stopped looking like words. Meredith had done what she did best. She had built a room, arranged the lighting, placed herself in the center, and invited everyone to see me as the shadow. Preston moved more formally. Mr. Barlow received a letter from an attorney Preston knew through real estate circles. It used phrases like undue influence, capacity concerns, and equitable family resolution. It suggested a sale of the lake house might prevent unnecessary escalation. Mr. Barlow read it over the phone without sounding surprised. "They're testing whether you scare easily," he said. "Do I?" "Well, that depends," he replied. "Are you scared?" I looked around Grandma's kitchen. The blue recipe box was on the counter. The lamp was on in the front window. Outside, the lake had turned gray under a low sky. "Yes," I said, "but not enough to lie." That night, I printed Meredith's email, saved screenshots of the post, wrote down every call, every message, every insinuation. For the first time in my life, I did not try to make the room more comfortable for everyone else. I let the truth take up space. The call from my supervisor came on a Monday morning, just after I had helped Mr. Alvarez practice standing from his recliner without using both arms. He was 86, stubborn, and proud of every inch he could reclaim after his stroke. When he made it to his walker without my hand on his elbow, he grinned like he had just won a marathon. "See?" "Yeah," he said. "Still got some horsepower." I laughed, wrote notes in his chart, and packed my gait belt into my bag. Then my phone rang. Denise Parker never called during patient hours unless something needed attention. "Nora," she said, "can you come by the office this afternoon?" Her voice was careful. That was how I knew. The office sat in a low brick building beside a dental clinic and a text preparer. I had walked through that door hundreds of times, usually carrying coffee, patient files, or extra resistance bands. That day, every step felt like entering a room where people had been speaking about me before I arrived. Denise was waiting in the small conference room. Beside her sat Martin from compliance, a man who always looked apologetic before saying anything unpleasant. Denise folded her hands. "We received an anonymous complaint." My stomach dropped. Martin slid a printed page across the table. The complaint claimed I had boundary issues with elderly individuals. It said I had become personally entangled with a vulnerable older woman near the end of her life. It suggested I might have used my professional skills to gain trust, influence decisions, and benefit financially. It did not name Grandma Ruth as my grandmother. It did not need to. My face went hot. "She was not my patient," I said. "We know she was not on our service," Denise replied. "But because of the nature of your work, we have to review it." "Review what? My grandmother died." My voice cracked on the last word. Denise's expression softened, but Martin kept looking at the paper. "We're not making any conclusions," he said. "We need a timeline, documentation of the relationship, and confirmation there was no company involvement." Company involvement. As if love needed a billing code to be trusted. Until the review was complete, they reassigned 2 of my most sensitive elderly clients. "Temporarily," Denise said. "Procedural," Martin said. "Necessary," they both said. I nodded because if I spoke, I was afraid I would start crying and never stop. In the parking lot, I sat behind the wheel with both hands pressed to my mouth. Meredith had not just whispered to relatives. She had reached into the one place where I knew who I was. For years, I had entered fragile homes with clean shoes and careful hands. I had taught people how to move safely through the rooms they were afraid to lose. I had defended their dignity in bathrooms, hallways, bedrooms, and kitchens. I had heard old men apologize for needing help, and old women joke through pain so their children would not worry. And now someone had written me into a story where that care became manipulation. When Jonah came home that evening, he found me at Grandma Ruth's kitchen table with the complaint in front of me. He read it once. Then he set it down like it was dirty. "Nora," he said quietly, "this is not grief. This is strategy." I know, but knowing did not make it hurt less. I looked at the blue recipe box on the counter. For the first time since opening it, I could not bring myself to touch it. What if people believe her? Jonah pulled out the chair beside me. Then we showed them the truth. I'm tired of having to prove I'm not what they say I am. He reached for my hand. I know, but don't hand them your silence. Not anymore. That night, after Jonah went upstairs, I stayed in the kitchen. The lamp glowed in the front window. The complaint lay beside my notebook. For the first time, I wondered whether every year I had spent keeping peace had trained my family to mistake my quiet for permission. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the complaint again. Boundary issues, vulnerable older woman, financial benefit. Words chosen carefully enough to sound concerned and ugly enough to stain everything they touched. By 3 a.m, the lake house had gone completely quiet. Jonah was asleep upstairs in the guest room, one arm probably thrown over his face the way he slept when he was worried. I stayed at the kitchen table, wearing Grandma Ruth's old cardigan over my pajamas, with my laptop open and nothing written. I kept trying to build a timeline for Denise in compliance. Dates of hospice visits, dates of family dinners, dates Grandma had signed legal documents I had not even known about. But my mind kept circling one question. Had I missed something? That was the cruelest part of a lie told with confidence. It did not just make other people doubt you. It made you check your own hands for dirt. I stood to make tea and knocked the blue recipe box with my elbow. A few cards spilled onto the table. Banana bread, chicken soup, lemon bars. One card slid halfway under the placemat, and when I reached for it, I noticed the false bottom was slightly lifted. I froze. The box had always been dented, always a little uneven, but I had never looked closely. I removed the cards in careful stacks. Beneath them, tucked flat against the metal, was a sealed cream envelope. My name was written across the front, Nora. Under it, in Grandma's small, slanted handwriting, were the words, "Open this when you begin to doubt yourself." I sat down before my legs could fail me. For a long moment, I only held it. The paper felt too thin to carry what I needed from her, and yet my hands trembled as if it were alive. Inside was one page. My sweet Nora, if you are reading this, then someone has made you feel guilty for being loved. I covered my mouth. Grandma had written slowly. Some letters shook, but every sentence was clear. She said Meredith would probably call me selfish. She said Preston would likely use polished words because men like him preferred clean language for dirty intentions. She said my mother might ask me to keep peace because peace had always been easier for her than fairness. Then came the line that broke me open. Caring for someone is not the same as controlling them. Love does not become manipulation because the person receiving it had something to leave behind. I read it once, then again. She had known, not vaguely, not emotionally, clearly. She wrote that she had made her decisions with her attorney, her doctor, and her own mind. She wrote that I was not responsible for other people's disappointment. She wrote that boundaries did not break families. They revealed where the cracks had been covered with good manners. At the bottom, she added, "Do not let them turn your silence into their evidence." I cried then. Not the quiet kind. Not the controlled tears I had swallowed beside her hospice bed. I cried with my forehead against the table, the letter under one hand, the recipe cards scattered around me like pieces of her voice. Jonah came downstairs. He did not ask what happened. He saw the envelope, the letter, me. He pulled out a chair and sat beside me until I could breathe. When I finally handed him the page, he read it slowly. His jaw tightened once, but he said nothing until he finished. Then he looked at me and said, We document everything. Not fight, not revenge. Document. The word steadied me. I opened my laptop again. This time, my hands did not shake as much. I created folders, emails, screenshots, calls, bank alert, hospice, work complaint, family messages. Jonah made coffee, though neither of us needed it. He wrote dates on sticky notes while I typed. We did not speak much. The house did not feel peaceful exactly, but it felt awake. By dawn, the first version of the timeline was finished. Grandma's letter lay beside the keyboard. For most of my life, I had believed silence made me kind. That morning, I understood silence could also make room for someone else's lie. Meredith came to my house just after 9 on a Thursday night. Not Grandma Ruth's lake house, my house. The small gray one Jonah and I had bought 3 years earlier, with a narrow porch, 2 maple trees, and a front step Jonah kept promising to rebuild when work slowed down. I saw her headlights sweep across the living room wall before the doorbell rang. Jonah looked up from the table, where we had spread printed emails, bank notes, and my work timeline. "You don't have to open it," he said. The bell rang again. Then came Meredith's voice through the door. "Nora, I know you're in there." Jonah said first. He did not look angry. That was one of the things I loved about him. His calm had weight. He opened the door only halfway and kept one hand on the frame. "Meredith," he said, "I need to speak to my sister." "She'll speak when she's ready." Her eyes flicked past him and found me. "Oh, so now you need a guard?" I stood slowly. For years, that tone would have pulled me forward, apologizing before I knew what I was sorry for. That night, Grandma's letter was still folded in my pocket. I walked to the door. Jonah stepped aside, but not away. Meredith stood under the porch light in a camel coat, her hair pulled back, her face tight with the kind of hurt she sharpened into accusation. "You're destroying this family," she said. "No," I answered. "I'm refusing to let you rewrite it." She laughed, short and bitter. "You always do this. You act wounded, and somehow everyone is supposed to forget you're sitting on Grandma's house and nearly $250,000. Don't stand on my porch and pretend this is about Grandma." Her eyes flashed. "It is about Grandma." Then why did Preston try to access her account from the Maldives? For once, she blinked first. That was a misunderstanding. That was a bank fraud alert. Her mouth tightened. "You're enjoying this." The old me would have rushed to deny it. I would have explained, softened, pleaded. Instead, I let the silence stand between us long enough to make her uncomfortable. Then I said, "You can lie to relatives. You can post pretty grief on Facebook. You can tell Mom I'm selfish. But don't come to my home after what you sent to my workplace and call it family." Something crossed her face, not guilt, recognition. So she did know. "I didn't send anything," she said too quickly. "I didn't say you did." Jonah looked at me, and I could feel him understand what I had just heard. Meredith pulled her coat tighter. "You won't keep that lake house, Nora." The sentence landed colder than the night air. I nodded once. "Thank you for making your intentions clear." She stared at me as if I had answered in the wrong language. Then she turned, walked down the steps, and drove away without looking back. I closed the door and wrote down the time, 9:17 p.m. Unannounced visit, threat regarding lake house, denied workplace complaint before being directly accused. Jonah read over my shoulder. "That last part matters," he said. "I know." The next morning, Mr. Barlow began pulling everything together. Hospice confirmed Grandma had been lucid when she gave instructions. Nurse Emily documented that Meredith was not authorized under HIPAA and had been informed of that clearly. Lakeshore Community Bank agreed to provide a written security summary. Denise confirmed the anonymous complaint had used phrasing similar to Meredith's family email. Then Mrs. June Donnelly called me. Her voice was thin but steady. "I didn't want to get involved, Nora. Your grandmother hated family mess." "I understand. But your grandmother hated lies more." I sat down. Mrs. Donnelly told me Preston had once stood on Ruth's back porch and said the property was worth more empty than lived in. She remembered because Ruth heard it too, and after he left, she had turned on the window lamp early that day. She said, "June, some people see a roof and think shelter. Others see it and start counting." I wrote that down with tears in my eyes. By evening, the folder on my table was no longer a collection of wounds. It was a map. And for the first time, every road on it led away from silence. Grandma Ruth's office was the smallest room in the lake house. It sat off the hallway behind the kitchen, with one window facing the lilacs and a desk my grandfather had refinished before I was born. The room still smelled faintly of cedar, printer paper, and the peppermint candies Grandma kept in the top drawer for no reason except that she liked offering people something sweet before saying something honest. I had avoided that room after she died. The kitchen held her warmth. The porch held her habits. The office held decisions. But Mr. Barlow needed any documents related to past family financial help, especially if Meredith intended to claim Grandma had unfairly favored me. So on Saturday morning, I unlocked the file cabinet beside the desk with a tiny brass key taped under the middle drawer. Of course, Grandma had labeled it. Ruth Caldwell did not leave chaos behind. The folders were organized by year: taxes, insurance, medical, house repairs, charitable donations. Then, at the back, I found a folder marked Family Assistance. My hands went still. Inside were copies of checks, bank slips, printed emails, and handwritten notes. The first check was made out to Meredith for $43,000. Memo line: boutique lease and inventory. I remembered that year. Meredith's little clothing store in Petoskey had almost failed after a brutal winter and a bad partnership. Mom had told everyone Meredith figured it out. Meredith hosted Easter that spring and let people praise her resilience over ham, scalloped potatoes, and lemon cake. Grandma had paid the back rent. The second record showed $11,200 transferred to Meredith after her son was born. The note said credit card payoff, baby expenses, no repayment expected. I remembered Mom saying Meredith was exhausted, overwhelmed, doing her best. Nobody called that greed. Nobody called that influence. The third file made my stomach tighten. $27,000 to Preston Hayes, short-term loan for renovation bridge expense. There was even an email from Preston. "Mrs. Caldwell, thank you for believing in the project. This will help us close the gap until the sale finalizes." Believing in the project. I almost laughed. Grandma had not believed in Preston's project. She had believed in keeping Meredith from drowning in his confidence. I sat on the floor with the folder open across my knees, feeling something inside me shift. Not anger, exactly. Anger was too hot for what I felt. This was colder. Meredith had spent weeks letting people believe Grandma had shut her out. She had let relatives imagine me sitting beside a dying woman, whispering my way into a house. She had called for fairness with hands already full of what Grandma had given her. Jonah found me there an hour later. He looked at the paper spread around me and said softly, "That's a lot." "It's not just the money," I said. "I know." She got help when she needed it. Real help. Quiet help. And she still wants people to think I stole something because Grandma finally protected me. Jonah sat on the floor across from me. What are you going to do with it? I looked at Preston's email, at Meredith's checks, at Grandma's neat handwriting in the margins. Paid. Gift. No repayment requested. Helped because she was scared. She kept these for a reason, I said. By Monday, Mr. Barlow had copies. He read through the folder in silence, page by page. When he reached Preston's loan, his eyebrows lifted only slightly. This changes the emotional argument, he said. Not the legal one? The legal documents were already strong. This answers the accusation that Ruth abandoned Meredith. I looked at him. She didn't abandon her. No, he said. She simply stopped funding the pattern. That sentence stayed with me. For years, I thought being loved meant being chosen loudly, defended publicly, claimed without hesitation. Grandma had loved differently. She had helped Meredith without humiliating her. She had protected me without announcing it. She had written down the truth because she knew someday someone might need more than memory to survive a lie. That night, I placed the family assistance folder beside the blue recipe box. One held what Grandma fed us. The other held what she forgave. And together, they told the part of the story Meredith hoped no one would ever read. The mediation room had beige walls, a long table, and a view of a parking lot where fallen maple leaves gathered against car tires. It was not the kind of room where families healed. It was the kind of room where people stopped pretending. Meredith arrived first, wearing a charcoal suit and the expression she used when she wanted strangers to know she was the reasonable one. Preston sat beside her with a leather folder, his wedding ring flashing each time he adjusted his cuff. Mom and Dad waited outside in the lobby. Meredith had asked them to come for support, which meant she wanted their presence pressing against me through the wall. Jonah sat on my left. Mr. Barlow sat on my right. Preston began gently. "We are not here to punish anyone," he said. "We want fairness, transparency, and a resolution that honors Ruth's memory." I looked at his hands. They were too still. Meredith nodded. No one should profit from confusion during grief. Mr. Barlow opened his folder. "Then we'll begin with clarity." He placed Grandma's trust documents on the table. Then the physician's cognitive capacity evaluation. Then the witness statements. Then his own notes confirming I was not present when Grandma signed. Preston barely glanced at them. Our concern remains undue influence. Mr. Barlow set down another page. "This is the security summary from Lakeshore Community Bank. It confirms an unauthorized access attempt from a location consistent with the Maldives, followed by an attempted recovery email verification connected to the name Hayes." Meredith's face drained. Preston said, "That was a misunderstanding." "Was it?" Mr. Barlow asked. He placed another document beside it. It was an email Preston had sent to a project partner 3 weeks before Grandma died. "Expected family estate liquidity should help us stabilize the renovation debt before Q4 pressure hits." For the first time, Preston's calm cracked. That was taken out of context. I heard my own voice before I planned to use it. "You counted Grandma's money before she was gone." Meredith turned toward him. "Preston?" He did not answer her. "Not really," Mr. Barlow continued. Mrs. Downley's written statement came next. Preston on Grandma's porch, saying the lake house was worth more empty than lived in. Meredith looked at me then, furious and embarrassed. "You collected neighbors against us?" "No," I said. "You collected lies. I collected people who heard the truth." Her eyes shone, but not with softness. "You always wanted to be the wounded one." I reached into my folder and took out the records from Grandma's office. $43,000 for Meredith's boutique. $11,200 for credit card debt and baby expenses. $27,000 to Preston's renovation project. I slid the copies across the table. Grandma chose you many times, Meredith. Quietly, kindly, without making you beg. She stared at the pages. I kept my voice low. You called it help when you received it. You called it favoritism when I was protected. No one spoke. Not Meredith, not Preston, not even Mom from beyond the wall. The mediator suggested a break. In the hallway, I stood near the water cooler while Jonah called Denise to confirm my work review documents had been received. Meredith and Preston stepped around the corner, but their voices carried through the thin office walls. We can't walk away with nothing, Preston snapped. There it was. Not grief, not fairness, nothing. Meredith came back into view slowly, as if the floor had moved under her. For the first time in my life, my sister looked less controlled than cornered. Mr. Barlow stood beside me. If this continues, he said evenly, loud enough for both of them to hear, we will discuss defamation, harassment, and the unauthorized account attempt in a different forum. Preston said nothing. Meredith looked at the closed mediation door, then at me. The silence in that hallway did not forgive anyone. But for once, it did not accuse me. Nothing changed all at once after mediation. That was not how real life worked. There was no tearful family circle, no perfect apology, no moment where Meredith ran into my arms and admitted every wound she had turned into a weapon. But the lies stopped moving so freely. Within a week, Meredith deleted the Facebook posts. Mr. Barlow drafted a written agreement stating she would not contact my employer again, would not imply I had exploited Grandma Ruth, and would not encourage relatives to pressure me about the trust. Preston signed too, though his signature looked like a man swallowing glass. Denise called me into the office the following Monday. This time, Martin from compliance did not slide any ugly pages across the table. He simply stated that the review found no professional violation, no patient relationship, and no company conflict. Denise looked me in the eye. I'm sorry you had to defend your integrity here. I nodded because if I spoke, I might cry. Not from weakness, from exhaustion. 2 of my elderly patients were returned to my schedule. Mr. Alvarez greeted me by lifting one hand from his walker and saying, "You're late, coach." I laughed for the first time in days. Preston's world cracked faster. His project partner withdrew from the Grand Rapids renovation after the email about expected family estate liquidity reached the wrong people. The debt Meredith had called temporary was larger than she knew, much larger. By Thanksgiving, she and Preston were no longer arriving anywhere as a polished pair. They came separately to my parents' house, and Preston left before dessert. Meredith did not apologize to me that day, but she did not accuse me either. Sometimes, with Meredith, silence was the closest thing to surrender. Mom called me 2 nights later. Her voice was small. "Nora, I thought I was keeping peace." I stood in Grandma's kitchen, one hand on the counter. "You were keeping Meredith comfortable." The line went quiet. Then Mom said, "I know that now." Dad called the next morning. He did not say much. He never did. But his voice broke when he told me, "I should have stepped in years ago." I wanted that sentence when I was 13. I needed it when I was 20. At 32, I accepted it without pretending it fixed everything. I did not celebrate winning because it had never felt like winning. I kept the lake house. I paid the property taxes. Jonah repaired the porch railing himself, sanding the wood smooth until no splinter could catch an old hand. We replaced the loose stair treads, added a second handrail, fixed the roof leak above the landing, and widened the path down to the dock. With part of the money Grandma left, I started a small fund in her name. The Ruth Caldwell Home Safety Fund bought shower chairs, grab bars, non-slip mats, and raised toilet seats for older patients who could not afford them. Nothing glamorous. Nothing anyone would toast with champagne. Just practical love. The kind Grandma understood. One evening in late November, Jonah and I drove to the lake house as the sky turned rose-colored over the water. The trees were bare by then, their branches black against the last light. At exactly 5:15, I turned on the lamp in the front window. Then I opened the blue recipe box and took out the peach cobbler card. For days when the house needs to smell like home. I sliced the peaches badly. Grandma would have noticed. She would have said nothing and fixed one piece when I looked away. When the cobbler baked, butter and brown sugar filled the kitchen. I cried standing beside the oven, not because Meredith had lost, not because Preston had been exposed, but because the house smelled like Grandma, and she would never walk through the door again. Jonah took one bite later and smiled softly. Tastes like Ruth. I looked at the lamp glowing in the window, the recipe box on the counter, and the dark lake beyond the glass. Maybe that's how she stayed, I said. The lesson Ruth left me was simple. Not everyone who says family is protecting love, and not everyone who asks for fairness is telling the truth. Do not let your kindness be rewritten as guilt. Do not let your silence become someone else's evidence. If this story touched you, please leave a like for the channel. If you have any thoughts, share them in the comments below and tell us where you are listening from. Thank you for staying until the end. I wish you health, peace, and strength. And I'll see you again in the next story on Revenge Glow.